Great peace, great peace, great peace, great peace, Shakoki. So the birds are out chirping. I'm waiting for, the sun to come up so I can, begin my day and collect the sun rays. That's very important, that you're able to saturate the brain that's wired, right, with hair, right? It's wired. You know, you're able to pull in the outer atmosphere that pulls the planet into rotation. Even if you're hiding from the sun, right? You're still going to get that energy. So everything around us moves. When there's food on the table, the food, it either turns green from mold or it hardens from staleness. Everything is moving. Now you see what I have in the back right there on the board, or I should say on the wall. There's a lowercase a and an upside down A. Lowercase e, right? That's how it's written in Middle to Late Latin. I was just on a long call with some continental, Central South Africans, right? Those who would be considered Bantu. They distinctively choose to be tribal and, not necessarily cohabitate or even nature the idea that they are the same as East Africans, while at the same time not really wanting to support the base of the product that associates through familiarity, from one natured being who possibly had, I shouldn't say possibly, but, who by all accounts, right, that would be more appropriate to say, the people that exist in America and the people that exist below Zambia. So they see themselves as distinct, right? They're Bantu. They're not Kushatic. They're not Arabic. They're not Neolithic. You see what I mean? They're on the tribal kick. So they don't see themselves as being black as everybody else would see themselves as being, right? They don't see themselves as like everybody else, right? And like all tribes who are into that type of cultural starkness, right? It's normal to them, right? They're all into that, right? You see, I noticed that, the people who look like high schoolers, who may be like in that rugged urban environment that you see in places like, the inner cities in America, right? But they're in the continent of Africa, right? They're more, right, like Northwest Bantu, right? Or Southeast Bantu. They're more like not grabbing in a sense. Like they see everything as it's not a big deal, right? But the ones who are like, Neolithic, right? Or you have the ones who are kind of just like, embracing the London accent, you know, they're embracing the Berkshire, right? You know, which is derived from us being called Yankees, right? You know, which is really the composite of being in New York, right? I've never been in New York. So it's that parallel, right? It's that polarity between the people who are from there and the people who came there, who learned from the people who were there. It's like a Jamaican calling a New Yorker or Harlem, you know, a Yankee, right? That it doesn't make sense, right? Because both of them act the same. But they were making the agree that you can't use language if you don't know what you're trying to say, right? You know, everybody know what they're trying to say, and everybody can write it in different languages. It's just a matter of, are you going to get to know the maturity of whatever it is you're looking at, right? Can you meet the maturity of it, right? You know, can you look at a town and say, I know what this language is, right? You know, the shifting of the vowels and the shifting of the consonants. Like if there's 3 E's in a word, then you know there's a double use or a triple use of vowels. You know, instead of having 4 vowels, well, they have 8 vowels. So the guy, you know, he was saying that, you know, and he had a very heavy London accent, right? You know, and they do a lot of stabbing up there, so it's like, you know, continental Africans, right? They can't be how Western society is, because if they are, you know, the government comes down hard on them. They have parapolice, you know, so they don't choose between, was this person sincere or was he not? They don't do that, you know. They come to eradicate whatever is at heist. Like why are you beating protesters? Well, it's different in London. So he was saying, like, you can't say holy and then say enter in a sentence together, you know, unless the enter is first. He was making that synopsis, you know, and he saw me when I was commenting, right? He saw I was speaking in my own language. And, you know, he was saying things like, you know, as if like we have the same experiences, but I had to do it his way. You know what I mean? Like, because again, if they see themselves as Yoruba, right? It doesn't matter if you're from America and you find out that you're a Yoruba, or you find out that you're Iwe, or, you know, you find out that you're Igbo, right? Doesn't matter, right? You're still a continental American. And I understand that now, right? But it wasn't a big problem in my degree of psychology, right? Because I saw that they were projecting. I saw that they wanted to know what I knew, but the pride set in where they didn't want to ask, right? You know, and you can kind of see, like, when a person is carrying on, they're speaking, right? They're speaking fast and they're saying things, you know, they've been trained to speak that way, which means they're not freestylers, you know, and I'm not promoting someone to freestyle or anything like that, but I'm just saying, like, the moment you make a mistake, right, where you put the P, you know, before the E, right, and you're leading into the Z, I know you're just saying things now, you know. So, you know, like, if I say something like Iwinatu, which means peace, in Croatan, right? If I say something like that, right? Because what I do is I mix languages. I don't do, oh, this is Yoruba. I don't do that. I do Iwe, right? You know, we're Muskegon, which means African language within American language. Because there's a melting pot in America, right? And it's always been that way. And I say that because people from Harlem, they communicate with people from Queens. You can't put one against the other, right? Because, again, you're a union. You know, it's like saying that Atlanta is against Savannah when you're a Confederacy, right? Same word, Union and Confederacy, same word. It's just one is used and appropriated by one tribe and the other is appropriated by another tribe, which means they have different languages, but they have the same meaning. It's like we all use the same phones, like allophones, pronunciation of words, pronunciation of stresses, pronunciations of cortexes, pronunciations of syllables and syntaxes. Like, you know, if you know math and you know square root, right, you know every language. Only language that I'm having a problem with right now is Gittese, because it's not written in Latin, you know. It's written in hieroglyphs, which means it's secret, right? You know, if you see a letter and it has a pronunciation of a Latin word, right, which is kind of weird, right? And you know, this is written different, right? Because you know how like they have a cross in their language, like how you get a cross in your language, but you have to learn the language by learning the rules. Now, some people just say, because like Ethiopians, they know how to read it too when you're writing it in just like normal English. So you use one of their symbols and you're writing good, they know exactly what it means. You see what I'm saying? And that's also how I know that that language was also in America. And it was Aboriginal, it just wasn't native. You know what I mean? So Americans, they pick up on things and they go. You know, Africans, they pick up on things and they stick with it. You know what I mean? Like, Americans don't do that. You know, this is why LeBron James is the best player. This is why Michael Jordan is the second best player. This is why Shaquille O'Neal is the most dominant center. You see what I mean? You can't stay in one area all your life, right? As a people, you know, and not join with other unpronunciated Nazarenes. You know what I mean? Like people who spell Nazarene different but look like you. You know what I mean? Like if you have a problem because a person says black instead of Bantu, like you're not trying to learn that person's experiences. You know, you put the A before they put the L. Wow, in a sense, it's right because Bantu means sun-kissed, you know, and black for all means is controversial. But if you read it through a meaning of hieroglyphs or petroglyph, you automatically know that L is a person standing. So it's like, it's almost like, you know, maybe the L, or I should say the E in Coptic. So if it's the E in Coptic, okay, he has his hands risen, right? Or it's the bird, one of them. Then you kind of get like, okay, English is, you're using English, then they're using English like Amharic, and you're using English like standard taught, right? You were taught English, right? You know? So again, you see the arrow pointing to the E, and you see the A. its heavy side is, you know, pulling gravity, right? So it's like a person hanging onto a pole and, you know, his arms are getting tired, right? It's going to fail eventually, right? You know, because you go back to A, right? That's like the beginning of ancestry, which is incest, you know. How do you get all these wars and they continue over the decades, right? This means there was some type of intervention that was helping A. You get what I'm saying? It was some type of intervention, because if you are A, right, you know, you're just doing what A does. And, you know, I was saying that Anali, right, like Natalie, Anali, A Mali. That's how they said in South America, right? Which means sister or mother, right? Or sister under a mother, right? Or like a daughter, I would say. Not a sister, but a daughter under a mother. Well, the Bantu, right? They're not particularly close to the Dogon, are they? From what I heard them say when they were talking, they're not. The Mali and like Dogon don't associate with Mali, but they spell it Inu or Anu, like ANU or ENU or ENO. You see what I mean? And like, I've never tried to study Bantu languages. You know what I mean? I've never tried to. And their understanding of it, I've never tried to go over there and read their languages. Like, I never tried to do that. I just knew what their languages meant just by looking at them, because I know everybody has the same understanding of vowels and consonants. Unless you are just like a tribe like the Sentinel, where no one knows what your language is except a couple loan words like Luay, right? Luau, luau. That's how they say luau when they're trying to fend off someone. Well, luau just means luau, like luau dang. You know, that's basically what it's like, right? And you notice those people are the Sudanese and the Sentinels. They go that S word. They're almost alike. But what you see is this, right? You have a Bantu version of Sudanese, and you also have like a Indo-European version of Sudanese, right? But they're both the same complexion. This is how you know the Sudanese are some of the oldest people in the world, you know. But they have conflict among themselves, and not to get sidetracked, but they have conflict among themselves. The ones who are more European or European-centric or Eurocentric, they don't necessarily like the ones who are like heavily into Bantuism, right? People who are standoffish, right? They don't associate with the other groups of clans who are in Europe. They don't associate with them, right? They're more associative to the hip hop. You see what I'm saying? Their own form of hip hop, right? You know, this is how you can see like when you see something on a outer surface, right? And you see there is like a problem. That's probably a problem between the hierarchy in their family. You know, like the mother probably doesn't get along with the father. The mother probably doesn't get along with the daughter. The mother probably doesn't get along with the son. The mother doesn't get along with the grandchildren. You see? Like, there's a lady, and she talks about this extensively. She talks about how Sudanese parents are just like some of, in her words, right? I'm not judging, you know, but she said they're like some of the most mild to intense mannered people. You know, I wouldn't say hypocritical, right? That would be understood as offensive. But this is how she describes it. She doesn't like the fact that she was born into that. And the same can be said for Black Americans. You know what I mean? We don't have it all together. We don't. And we have the biggest problem, right? Because we have shadeism. We have colorism. We have interpretism. You know? So imagine, like, you all speak English and you all speak your tongue and additional to another tongue, right? Like, you all are around North Sudanese, right? So you all know and understand Arab languages, you know. You all understand Arab languages. You all understand Arabic. Well, blacks, due to all of this mixture that's happening, an admixture, right? And someone was pointing this out. I don't remember who it was. But we don't speak all this. We don't even have the same accents. We don't have the same phonology. You know how you pronounce syntax? We don't have the same phonology. We don't have the same loan words. Like, you're criticized if you don't speak Ebonics. you're criticized if you speak proper. So it was like, where do you go? Where's the in between? You know? At that point, you become outside of all cultures, and you have to depend on your closest relatives, right? Your first relatives, your base relatives. You don't depend on distant cousins. You don't know your distant cousins. You live in America, you don't know them. You view your distant cousins as an enemy, you know what I mean? To a point where violence seeps in, right? For no reason. Sudanese don't really have that problem. Bantu people don't really have that problem. They make jokes out of being different, right? Which lets you know they understand the standard of acceptance and to disengage. Black Americans don't understand that, you know. They freak out and it becomes a mental problem because, again, we know what schizophrenia is, right? It's to be scared of the unknown. And that draw that you get, right, that southern draw schizophrenia, it comes from the South. There's the S word again. In every region of the Americas, right, it comes from the South, the southern parts. If you're in Chicago, it's the southern part. People on the west side don't deal with schizophrenia. Even though they're black, right, it's the ones on the south side. That's where all the killing is happening. In every southern region of the states where there's the population, right, if it's not happening on the south side, meaning, you know, a city doesn't have a south side, like you would take a place like, you know, Cleveland or somewhere, like it doesn't have a south side, right? Well, you have an east and a west side. It's not going to go to the north side. That's where all the commercial activities happen in every city. It's going to trickle into the balance, right? That even balance, that even kill, where you have the west and the east. If you come to Southeast Michigan, right, you come to the east side, you're going to see killing. Because there's no south side in Detroit. You see what I mean? At least for blacks, right? They say Southwest Detroit is where all the Mexicans are, right? You see what I'm saying? So all this is science, man. And, you know, at this point, like, I try not to, because like the internet, right? It taught me a lot about people. You see people on here who just flat out say they don't like Africans. And they'll cinemate with, or simulate. They'll symbolize it with, or sell it, right? They'll sell it to being Negro, right? You know, a girl was like, she doesn't like Africans, and she estimated it to mean Negro, like, so that when you hear Dr. Dre say, if you just listen to a person, right, they'll tell you who they are. You know what I mean? When he says that, right, that's what I thought about her, right? All her videos are about in an admit, right? In an admit. You can guess. She don't like her dark skin side. And then in one of the frames, right, you can see like all her family members. It's nobody dark up there. You know what I mean? But she's the darkest one in the family. See? So where's that woman or where's that man who is dark? Why isn't he in the photo album? We're dealing with trauma. Like, everybody on the internet is showing you, in some sense, their trials that they go by in the day. They're showing you the trauma that's associated with their existence. This is why you have to read the Quran. This is why you have to read the Bible. And a lot of people, right, they'll say Indians built the castles, the sand castles in California, right? They'll say that, but in the same sentence, they wouldn't say that, it was the Spanish and Italians, Christopher Columbus, Napoleon, right? They wouldn't say that, right? They'll say American Indians built it, and in the same sentence, they'll say Arabs are bad people. They were the sellouts. You see what I mean? Like, the languages are evolving right now because people are going to listen to what everybody has to say. This is why China wants to censor everything. And like, I kind of agree with it, but I don't agree with communism. As of this day, I don't agree with it. I don't agree with socialism. I agree with tribalism, but not just tribalism, right? Not even that to the most degree, right? I agree more with clanism. Ironic, right? You go to the south of Mississippi and everybody is in fear of who? The black sheep, the boogeyman, the KKK. Well, you take that cone off, right? It's probably a black person, right? They're not into clanism. All our life, right, we were taught the KKK were bad people, right? They lynch people. Not to know that it was black people in the Klan. Dave Chappelle showed you that. So, let's be honest. Like, if we're going to say, you need more vitamin A than you need calcium, right? Well, what if you have a low milligram of calcium, right? You're going to continue to take vitamin A, or are you going to get a multivitamin? You probably want to get the multivitamin. This is why I love the English language. It's so and not matterly, but in every sense that it allows you to know what you already didn't spent all these years to know. You can compound words. You can loan words. You can put words all together from all different cultures. Everybody has figured out that, English is just their language, right? Whatever language they speak, right? All these languages are the same, but people don't think like I have to know every language. I have to even know languages that haven't even been resettled or resurfaced yet. I know in a square foot mile radius, right? I'm probably the only one who know more than 3 languages. In the diameter, right? I know that. Like, so the sun is out, and I'm getting ready for it to head this way so I can get some more sun. Drunk some coffee, didn't go to sleep last night. Listened to podcasts, did some writing, did some journaling, trying to keep my mind active, you know what I mean? Not so much my body, right? I've did plenty of that in my younger years. At this stage, I want to get wiser. A man earn his keep by thinking and not necessarily by doing. Many adages, Man uses his mind, not his hands. You see what I mean? So we're going to get to a point where we figured all of these things out. We're going to get to that point. Don't settle for less. You see what I mean? We understand that you have people who are around us that are saying they're us, but they're using double talk and they're engaging in small talk in the same way. You know, so that is very dangerous, right? If an enemy is openly saying they're your enemy, you know, minus the body language, right? You have to be very careful about who has access to you. You have to be very careful. They said in the 60s, you know, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, you know, the counterintelligence agencies, they were sending letters to organizations. You know, well, people can just call your phone now and leave a AI message, you know, in a female voice, right? As if that means something, you know, because you have the choice to choose between USA male, Indian male, USA female, Indian female. You see what I'm saying? As if you're not hip to what they're trying to do. So pay attention to the movers and shakers out here, right? If a person has a camera, you know, he knows people who are in tech, and we already know who are in tech, you know. So if a person is in a community, right, you need to know what community they're in and how does that community have a relationship with your community. Black people are in like the best position right now, you know, particularly those who are like still in the hood, you know, because like they can go to the church and get information. You know, you have deacons, you have pastors, you have bishops, you have elders, seniors, veterans, right? They're all walking throughout the communities, right? The Jehovah's Witness, right? They walk around on Saturdays. They're knocking on your doors. They're trying to see if they can give you information that they know without being broadly moving, right? Like they're trying to take from you. They're trying to find out what you know. No, it's not that, right? They're checking up on a community, you know. And I don't play the secularism. I don't do that. I meet people who are decent, you know. If you're decent, you're good with me. You know, I don't care what religion you are. And, you know, a lot of the times, right, you gauge a person by what community they live in, not by what they know. Because if they live in a community, whatever it is they know is going to be different from the reality of someone else who may know a little bit more and live in a different community. If a person lives next to you, that's someone you need to know. If a person is opening up a church that is next to your house, that's someone you need to know. Because they have the responsibility of etiquette. They have the responsibility of credibility. You see what I mean? There's that E and that C word. Everything goes back to A, because A is just E. You see? When you think of the word early, right, you know, it's pronounced in so many different ways. Early starts with an A, you know. And you know, it's people who talk like that, right? You know, like it's crazy. Like black people can pronounce like every, you know, like comedian Godfrey, like he knows like everybody's, like especially Steve Harvey, right, and Donald Trump. He knows how to sound like everybody, right? He knows everybody's, you know, allophones and phonology. He knows it, you know, and he practices it, right? It almost looks effortlessly. He practices it. You know, like listen to his stand-up, you know, subscribe to his YouTube channel. You know, he loves politics. You know, I give him that, like he loves politics, you know. He tells things straight. Like you have to be black in order to understand that experience. If you're not black, you know, it's probably just going to be a point to briefly antagonize and go on to what you were doing, right? You know, But to be black, right, it's only fathomable to understand what other people see our experiences as, Like if a person say like, they dress in black, they think black, and you often wonder, is that really real? You see what I'm saying? You often wonder, because if I see someone who is, not entirely black, right, but they identify as black, right? The black font, FONT. You start to wonder, like, is this really happening right now? You see what I'm saying? But with 35 minutes in, I'm going to go out and I'll talk to you all. If I come back with some more information, I'm going to share it. So I'm not really in the mood to talk. So great peace, y'all cookie.